Good to see you. I'm up here trying to put the microphone on my belt and had it turned the wrong side. It wouldn't work, so that's the way it goes. Genesis chapter 20 is where we are. Genesis chapter 20. I was thinking as I stood up here, I don't know if I've ever shared with you the old joke about the guy that started making the announcements and everybody was talking, and he stood up and he said, okay, he said, preacher's fixing to preach, so our fun's over. Yeah, I knew it was coming. That was sort of a preemptive strike. Yeah, I do. He's going to stand up and make the announcements. And our fun's over. Oh, any announcements? I really didn't look at the announcement sheet that we need to make. And, okay. Yeah. All right. We're glad that you're here. Hope that you've had a good week. Hope that you're going to have an even better one this week. And things go well with you and yours. Genesis chapter 20. We're in the midst of Abraham. And Abraham has his good points and his bad points. He's still going to have his good points and his bad points. Not so much in this chapter, but in the next one. A little bit in this chapter. I see some problems, but we've seen them before with Abraham, at least chapter 20. 21, we get into a little different story, kind of a problem with Abraham. But it helps us see I realize not a term, but the humanness of the man. Not a term. We get to see the fact that he's just like the rest of us, and we're just like him in many ways. But it is appreciative, at least for my sake, and probably for yours as well, that even though we see Abraham and we see his problems and we see his mistakes, his goof-ups, his failures, that God still calls him a man of faith, and God commends his faith. And so to that end, we see that while we make mistakes, and we try not to make mistakes. There's the issue. We try not to make mistakes, but we're still human, so therefore we're going to make mistakes. And God tells us that. But then when we see others that the Bible talks about, well, here's folks of faith, but they made mistakes. We say, all right. It's not all right that we make the mistakes, but it's all right in the mistake that we make that we don't have to be perfect, because we can't live to that expectation. But we try to, and we strive to. And Abraham, like I say, he's as a failure here, but it's interesting. Abraham journeyed from there to the south, dwelt between Kadesh and Shur, and stayed in Gerar. Now Abraham said to Sarah, his wife, she's my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Now, we're at this again, aren't we? We saw this in chapter 12, verse 13. And evidently, we go down especially to, let's see, where is it? The 13th verse, or the 12th and 13th verse, and we'll talk about it when we get there. But it seems as if this was a prearranged sort of it was a lie, yet it wasn't a lie. Abraham, he tried to show how it was. And we'll talk about that, like I say, when we get there. But this was an arrangement, if you will, that when they went into a community, when Abraham and Sarah went into community, that he said, well, this is my sister. And she would say, well, this is my brother. And they did that. And Abimelech, who's the king of Gerar, basically takes Sarah in order to put her, if you will, in his harem. While years have passed, it's sad to say that Abraham, even though called out, as we saw it in the 12th chapter, still makes the same mistake. Which teaches us really that we should do our best. It's not to say that we won't make the same mistake twice. That's not to say that. But it is to say that when we make a mistake and we have that pointed out to us, that we would do well to try to strive with all that is within us not to do it again. Now, like I say, when we get down just in a few verses, we're going to say some more about this. But that's sort of the lesson that we need to learn. To try to do better, try to grow, try to improve. That's what God expects of us. Is if we're still making the same mistakes, that's where the problem really lies. And so, Abraham, Sarah, once again, they tell what is basically, you could say, a half-truth. Let's look at it. God came to Abimelech, verse 3, in a dream by night and said to him, "Indeed, you are a dead man, because the woman whom you've taken, for she is a man's wife." She's married to a husband. She's married to Abraham. Well, Abimelech is going to cry out now, I didn't know this. They didn't tell me. Abimelech, verse 4, had not come near her, and he said, "Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands, I have done this." Now, we might want to key on Abimelech's look at and how he views all of this as opposed to Abraham. First of all, Abimelech says, "Lord, wait a minute." And it's interesting because the first thing that he says is, "Lord, what are you going to do with this righteous nation?" And so he appeals to God's justice. That's what he's really appealing to. You're a just man. You're a fair man. You're fair from that standpoint. And so he says, "Will you slay a righteous nation also?" That's kind of interesting to be his first question, isn't it? But like I say, he's appealing to the justice of God. You're fair. And so in your fairness, look, she told me that she was his sister, and he said that, and she said, "Well, this is my brother." And so he said, this is something that I did in my innocence. He says, in my integrity. The Hebrew word has the idea of innocence. In my innocence of my heart, in the innocence of my mouth, I've done this. I've done this not knowingly. Well, it reminds us that we should do our due diligence. We should do our homework. That's key in everything. I used to preach that a lot. I don't preach as much anymore, but I should. We should always do our homework. The sad thing is just like when we were kids, we didn't like to do homework from school. We don't like to do homework with regards to God. But we should always try to see all sides and see everything as it is and as it takes place. We should not just look at things from the perspective of our view, but look at it from the perspective, of course, the view of God, first of all, and then our own view. And then how are others going to see this? How is this going to be perceived? How is this going to be taken? And so we need to look at it from really all sides. And, like I say, I've preached it. I've said it in elders' meetings sometimes and business meetings. We need to do some homework. We need to see what's all going on and see what is there. And so in many ways you could say Abimelech wasn't doing his homework. Well, how far could he go and how much could he get? He basically took, as he said, I took Abraham and Sarah's word for it. And their word should have been good. Well, sometimes we have to ask the right questions, right? That's part of doing our homework. Ask the right questions. Not just a question, but ask the right question. And we hear that on the news so many times. A question is asked of whoever it may be, and you say, that sounds fishy. And then later some more information comes out on it, and you say, oh, now I understand. And then you say, the right question was not asked. You might say, well, if there was no hint that Abraham and Sarah were not telling him the exact truth, why would he ask further questions? Well, that's right. I get that. And I see that from Abimelech's side, and probably you do too. But the point is that Abimelech says, Lord, look, they told me this. Now let's go on. Let's look at 2 more verses, and then we'll open it up. God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now, how in the world God did that, I don't know. It doesn't tell us. You could say, well, that's the providence of God, and God worked all that out. Let's go with that. That's the best answer I have, best answer I know, but how he did that, I don't know. But basically, God says, Abimelech, I saved you because even though you put her in your harem, you haven't touched her. I know that. Now, therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet. This is the first time we see this word. And it's interesting from a standpoint of Genesis and in the Bible. It just simply means he's God's spokesman. The word prophet, there's 3 Hebrew words translated prophet, and then there's 1 Greek word translated prophet. The Hebrew terms, if you just put all of them together, one has the idea of a spokesman. One is the idea of one who bubbles forth and bubbles up. And one kind of combines all 3. But they all basically mean the same thing, all 3 Hebrew terms. One who speaks for another. And the word prophetes, which is the Greek word that's translated prophet, is also it's a simple term, and it really has no other meaning other than prophet, but we understand a prophet to be one who speaks forth. So when we go to, say, Isaiah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets of the Old Testament, we often look at it from a standpoint of, well, they're prophesying, they're predicting the future. Not always. These were the prophets. These were those that bubbled forth with the message of God and proclaimed it to others. Now, are there predictive elements in the prophets? Yeah. But not always. So we understand the difference of the terms. Now, there's prophecy, which is looking to the future. But prophet, the word prophet, just simply means a speaker. And so God tells Abimelech, Moses is a speaker of God. And notice what he says, for he's a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all of yours. You're going to reap your actions. You're going to reap your reward for your actions. And so God promises Abimelech that very point. Anything kind of interesting, but anything we need to add or anything you'd like to say or ask? Well, all right. So Abimelech rose early in the morning. I found this interesting in studying that term, rose early. You see that several times in the Bible. Now, as I think it does here, it just means the idea that they got up early in the morning. But also, that phraseology has the idea of enthusiasm or zeal. So sometimes when you read in the Bible, they rose up early in the morning, there's a sign of enthusiasm, zeal. More than likely, though, Abimelech's zeal here, if you will, if we want to apply that thought to it, is we need to straighten all this out. This needs to get done. We need to take care of this. So Abimelech rises early in the morning. He called his servants and told all these things, and their hearing, the men were very much afraid. Abimelech called Abraham, said to him, "What have you done to us? How have I offended you that you have brought to me and on my kingdom a great sin? You've done deeds to me that ought not to be done. Then Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you have in view that you have done this thing? Why'd you do this? That's really the question. Why'd you do this? Why did you, notice what he says, you have done deeds to me that ought not to be done. And I think we would agree, right? He lied to him. Preacher, Abraham's going to tell him down here in verses 11, 12, and 13. Abraham's going to tell him, yeah, I did, but it didn't. It's really true. We're half brother and half sister. Yeah. View it from the perspective not of self, but of God. When we begin to view our morality, we must view our morality not from the way we think it should be or the way we see it, but view it from the way God sees it. That's the key. That's the idea in trying to find out how God wants us to live. Well, it was a half-truth. That's not so bad. But, I've told half-truths, and they get you out of trouble, and so forth and so on. And you might say, well, but look at it from Abraham's standpoint. What's a lie? Well, a lie is a deception meaning to deceive someone. Yeah, but in many ways, Abraham was telling the truth, wasn't he? Sarah was too. In many ways, they weren't. So then we get down to another question. When is a lie a lie? When is a lie a lie? When it's told to deceive. And if you stop and think about what we're fixing to find out with regards to Abraham, what's Abraham going to say? He's going to say, I told you the truth, but only really half of the truth. But what did he say? Why he said it? Because I didn't think the fear of God was in this place. So Abraham set out then to judge the folks, right? Mistake. And as he judges them, he tells this untruth. Something somebody like to say. So Abraham said, verse 11, because I thought surely, the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife, but indeed she is truly my sister. Well, he's half right. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. And it came to pass, when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, this is your kindness that you should do for me in every place, wherever you go, say of me, he is my brother. Now, I was reading someone on these verses, and they raised an interesting point, which they couldn't answer, and thus, truthfully known, no one else can answer. And they asked the question, do you think that Abraham and Sarah had this agreement? Whenever we go into a new place, you just say, well, that's my brother, and I'll just say, well, that's my sister, and everything will be all right. And that they made this pact, say, as far back as chapter 12, which was several years earlier. And that they just continued it without renewing that agreement, without spending time talking to one another. Who knows? Who knows? it is interesting when you look at what Abraham says in this text. He says, well, we decided that whatever city we go into, this is what we do. This is our dog and pony show. This is the way we do it. And so it's interesting that he makes this claim. Look in verse 14. Sadly, it seems as if he is rewarded for his misdeeds. Truth be known, there are plenty of folks that have reaped things beyond that are good for things that are wrong. And we look at that and we say, why and how is that? But it's just fact. Abimelech took sheep, oxen, male and female servants, gave them to Abraham, and he restored Sarah, his wife, to him. He profited from his lie. Yeah. Abimelech, though, remember what he's trying to do? He's trying to get in good with God, right? God said, if you don't restore him, or you don't restore her to him, judgment's going to be upon you. Abimelech is caught in a bad situation as well. And so Abraham, profits from his lie. He did in chapter 12. Now, evidently, Abraham was rich anyway, but he's made richer. Abimelech, in verse 15, says, see, my land is before you, dwell where it pleases you. Now, this is different. Pharaoh, back in chapter 12, Pharaoh expelled Abraham. Get out of my land. Get away from here. But in chapter 20, the king of Gerar, Abimelech, says, here's land. Stay where you want to. Abimelech is concerned about himself, and he's concerned about his nation. And whatever he can do to, in his eyes, at least please God, he's trying to do. Sarah, verse 16, said, behold, I have given your brother he said to Sarah, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, this vindicates you before all who are with you and before everybody. Now, here's an interesting thing. He basically says, okay, Abraham, I've given you these cattle. I've given you these things that you need. You can stay where you want to. Now, Sarah, he says, I'm going to give you 1,000 pieces of silver. Now, when we look at that, did he literally give her 1,000 pieces of silver? Could have. Some, I forgot who said it, but someone said once that maybe this was the value of all the gifts that were given. I don't know. But he says that giving him 1,000 pieces of silver, and he says, this vindicates you. In other words, this shows you to be all right. This shows you to be just. This shows you to be fair. And so he says, this vindicates you before everybody. You're not a bad lady. You're not a lady of ill repute. You're fine. And so, notice that it says, thus she was rebuked, which is kind of an interesting way of looking at it. But the word rebuked there, you probably have a footnote in your Bible, can mean she was justified. She was cleared. She was shown not to be the one to be blamed for any of this. And so, in many ways, if you stop and think about what you have in these few verses, is you have Abimelech confessing what he's done, because he says, I've told everybody, I've given this money, and I've vindicated you before everybody. He's told everybody, he's confessed, but then he's also repented. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I've done. The two of those things for any adult to do and to truly mean are most difficult. Why? Because we don't like to admit that we're wrong, do we? And not only do we like to admit that we're wrong, we want to try to justify what we've done, which is what Abraham and Sarah did. They tried to justify what they did. Well, here's why I did this. Here's the reason behind what I did. Well, if we get down to brass tacks for just a minute, the reason why we did what we did, we could ultimately blame on Satan. But we still had to choose to follow that path. And so it then really falls upon us. And we just simply have to say, here was my role in this, and I was wrong. But now remember, part of repenting is the idea of truly meaning what you say. That when you say, I'm sorry, you really mean it. And you might say, well, Abraham has a little bit of a problem here because he's done it before. Well, we can make the same mistakes. But preacher, it just seems like that in verse 13 especially, that they just did it wherever they went. Yes. Let's finish up this chapter, and then I want to make a couple of points, and we'll see. We'll open it up. So Abraham prayed to God. God healed Abimelech, his wife, his female servants. Then they bore children, for the Lord had closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. There's not much to say here. God basically, they were in the midst of problem. God had closed them up, no children. Now all of a sudden, because everything has been straightened out, God allows them to have children. The story itself in the 20th chapter is an interesting story, but it really reminds us of the point that we made a while ago. We need to view what we do based upon how God sees it, not upon how we see it or how the world sees it. It's very hard for us to not view what we do upon those two standards. We want to view it upon, well, okay, this is how I see it, and we start to justify ourselves. We saw it in Adam and Eve. Adam trying to justify himself. We see here Abraham trying to justify himself. But while it was not right then we say, well, by the world standards, these things are all right. We see more and more of our morality of the world coming from the morality of the world. You might say, what do you mean by that, preacher? When we begin to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? We're not seeking what God says. What does God say on the issue? What does the Bible say? That's important and that's key. But we're often saying, well, oh, brother so-and-so over there, oh, sister so-and-so, or just my neighbor down the street, and we kind of get this view, and you might say, well, where do we get our views from? Well, therein may lie part of the problem. Our world, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about our world, our society, has gone from reading the Bible to watching TV. Now, preacher, you like TV and you watch TV, you're right, mostly sports, but I enjoy those things. And I admit, I'm man enough to admit, I watch an occasional Hallmark movie because I like to see my wife every once in a while, so I watch a Hallmark movie. But used to, before TV, what did folks do? They read. And we went, if you look at the history of mankind, we went from reading the Bible to reading what? Newspaper, right? Now the newspaper is kind of old hat. We read everything that's online. But we've quit reading this. And you hear folks say, as I do in talking to them, well, I believe, I think. My question to them is, where do you get that? And they usually don't have an answer. But let us understand, lest we think, well, we're Christians and we study the Bible. We're here in Bible school. And yes, we are. And I'm so proud for you all and for your study. Let us understand that all of us, our worldview is so made by not just the Bible, but by everything around us, right? How we were raised, the influence of the folks that were with us when we grew up, the influence of the world in which we live. And so, not always is that bad, but not always is that good. But our view should ultimately be dictated by what God says. Enough said. What do you have to say about this story?
He talked to Abraham and then he turned to Sarah and said, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'll give you a brother. Kind of a sarcastic reply. That's why when you said it been justified, I thought it was Abimelech's way of saying you were involved in this as much as he was.
Yeah. Which is true. Absolutely true. I wonder, have no way of knowing, okay? But don't you wonder when Abimelech took Sarah, what Sarah was thinking, number one. And I understand the rights of women in that day. But how far Sarah would have let it go and for how long? I mean, if a policeman were to come in here and get me today for a crime, I would go with him. But I would not be screaming and hollering. I'd really be asking the question, what is this all about? I would let my voice be made known. And I think we all would as well. By the way, I haven't done anything. So if they come in here, they're coming for Jay. They're not coming for me. Missy said, that's right. But, I would try to say, no, this is not right. And we would go through the process of getting my voice out there and getting what needs to be said and done. And so I just wonder, I have no way of knowing. The Bible doesn't tell us. And I think to put an answer to those questions is not fair and not right. But we can wonder.
Back to talking about the half-truths. You read the newspaper got some retraction. Now we've got social media and nothing gets retracted, but it might get deleted. That's just because it probably wasn't true. But right about having to look in to see what's true, what's not, do our homework. There's a show I'm watching on TV right now. At the beginning, it says based on true facts. And then right below that, it comes up and it says characters, events have been changed for dramatic effect.
Yes.
I'm like, well, what's true and what's not?
Yes.
So now after I finish it, I'm going to go look and find out
Yeah.
what's really true. In this day and age, you don't know.
That's right. It's exactly right.
You do have to do it.
It's exactly right. Yeah. The rest of the story. I sure liked him. I'll put it like that. And he had a few books out. I read one or two of them just because I enjoy stories. But yeah. The rest of the story. He told the back end, if you will. He told, if you will, he told God's half, or at least that's the way it was perceived from the standpoint of we heard Abraham and Sarah's first half. Now he told the rest of it. Very true. Yeah. Yeah. I went one time to hear him speak, and his wife, I believe, was sick, and so they sent his son. It was actually at a benefit for Fred Hardman, and they sent his son, but his son was very entertaining. I think it would have been better with Paul, but his son, Paul Artin Jr., was pretty good.
You asked the question, how far would Sarah have let this go? That question, how far would Abraham?
Excellent question. Yeah.
And is this their first trial?
Yeah.
Was it their last?
Right. That's, yeah. And how many in between? Yeah. Good points.
He was worried about that. He wasn't worried about Sarah. He was worried about his own skin.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like Christian said last week. Women didn't really count.
Yeah. That's very true. Very true.
Remember also, we're not Old Testament.
Yeah, thankfully. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I'm going to call it cup or just
Either one. Any of those three will cover it. But yes, that's right. Anything else?
Paul, the last verse about opposing the women for one side.
Yeah.
I would assume this sounds like this story kind of happens kind of bang bang overnight. But in his dream, he told me better straighten this out before I'll make it work for you. Would this been one of the repercussions? I'm assuming that maybe if he had not given Sarah back.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And that's what I was just fixing to say. I don't know. That's the part of this story, and I was looking at this again last night. That's part of the story I don't know. I don't know. It's like say, and I'm with Ken, it seems like, okay, boom, 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 boom. But then at the same time, too, when you look at verse, say, 17, 18, you think, well, did God just close the wombs for one night? Which, I mean, that's possible. But was it an extended period of time? And I don't know the answer. But, and so I don't really have a definitive answer. But, yes, I think if he hadn't given them back, that probably would have been the repercussion.
This was an acceptable way of life for society at this point, what Abimelech has done. And that within itself, till it became public, was not a big deal.
Very true. And here's even something I was thinking about last night as well. Not just that, but the fact that Abraham and Sarah were half brother and half sister. Of course, full-blooded. I mean, we get that, but half. That's too close too for me. I don't have a half. I just have a full sister and love her to death, but not that much. But so yeah, good point. And I think it gets back to, at least in part, what we talked a little bit about last week or week before last, and that is that there was not the covenant that evidently Abraham was living under. We do not have, and so don't try to apply the Levitical covenant or the covenant that was the laws that were given on Mount Sinai, revealed to us in the book of Leviticus. Don't apply them to Abraham because he wasn't bound by them yet. Anything else? Good, all good. Well, interesting when you study dreams. You dream every night. And part of the understanding of dreams is that part of the reason we don't remember, not all, but part of the reason we don't remember them is because of the way we wake up. And if you wake up, the tendency is, according to those that have studied this, if you wake up slowly, you're more apt to remember them than if you wake up quickly. And most of us wake up by an alarm clock, right? And so therefore, but I had a dream the other night, and I remember that a lot of it was impossible. So, you know, oh yeah, they do. I thought I'll never be in that position. Don't want to be. I think I was president of the United States. Don't want that job. And I have no idea where that came from. Must have been, as the time of year that we're in, it must have been that morsel of cheese that I ate right before I went to sleep. Do you remember that story? Anything else?
All of that, like you said, somebody like this stranger who's coming into a land, and I'm assuming he came in with all his entourage and all his possessions.
Yeah.
He done some homework about
Yeah.
these people were, where they came from, maybe some past experiences
Yeah.
like Egypt.
Yeah. And
Maybe where he gained some more of that.
would the slaves have told off on Abraham?
Abraham, Sarah, that's close to incest.
Yeah.
Look back at Adam and Eve. The world was finished. Because of them. Then you know, incest went on.
Yeah. Their children. Yeah. 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 Nobody else. So had to. So yes. So replenish the earth. So anything else? All good. All excellent. Well, we can get the first little bit. Isaac is born. We'll get there that far. The Lord visited Sarah as he'd said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived, bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Well, that makes sense. Isaac means laughter. And we already looked at the fact that when angel of the Lord visited both Sarah and Abraham, that it was pretty much a laughing matter. How can this be when we're old? So finally Isaac is born. Verse 4, Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, was 8 years old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him, and Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. So she also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, for I have borne him a son in his old age? Here's what I want us to get out of this in this day and age. Promise made, promise fulfilled. I want you to extrapolate something. Extrapolate just means to carry along in a line of reasoning, to kind of spread it out. When we really sit and analyze the salvation of our soul, and we wonder through a standpoint and through a prism of logic how it's going to happen and how it makes sense, we really don't have an answer. And I mean that from this standpoint, and I'll do it quickly. How can one man's blood that was shed on a cross years ago justify what I've done in my lifetime and make me acceptable in the sight of God so that He will give me heaven for eternity? And we scratch our heads and say, impossible. Think about Abraham, 100 years old, having a son. Impossible. But reality, God's promise, God fulfilled. Our salvation, God promised, God will fulfill. Thanks be to God for the gift that we have. Anything else? Well, we'll have to stop right there because the natives are coming in the back. We appreciate you. and appreciate your comments and suggestions and thoughts. And we will start right there next week. Thank you. Y'all have we can have a prayer right quick. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we're indeed thankful to you for this day, for the blessing of it, for the opportunities to study your word. Help us to always be good students of your word and of your will, and help us to do our best to live lives the way that we should in accordance to what you've told us. We ask that you watch over us, that you bless us, be with those that will be announced in a few minutes as not doing well. Bless them and keep them. Watch over us and hold us as we hold to you. For this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Y'all have a great week. Thank y'all.